welcome back to Speak Up, CHHA and one and only summer student podcast, the show where three students with hearing loss openly discuss all things from accommodation issues to masks to education, transportation, with a sprinkling of personal stories in between. In case you didn't know, CHHA stands for Canadian Hard of Hearing Association, the Canadian voice on all things hearing loss. My name is Catherine Dumais, and with me are my co-hosts Jason and Kaylin. Hi guys, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hello.
Today we are thrilled to have a special guest with us, Peng Tee. Peng was born deaf in both ears and is a longtime cochlear implant user in his 20s. He is the founder of the Cochlear Implants Project, which aims to empower cochlear implants users towards self-acceptance and promote greater awareness of the unique experiences these users face. Welcome, Peng.
Hi, I'm Peng.
Later on in the show, we'll be covering some CHHA news regarding the mentorship program, so stay tuned. Also, since we have recorded this interview over Zoom, there will be some background noise that was unable to be silenced. As a result, if there's any time where you feel like you may not be able to understand what is being said, don't worry, you can reference the transcription down below.
Sign up for our monthly newsletters, iListen and iListen Plus. Be sure to click the link down below for more information and for the transcript of this episode.
So let's start off with an easy question. What was it like to get your cochlear implants? Do you remember a time without them?
So perhaps I can start by sharing when I got my cochlear implant. So I got my cochlear implant as a kid. I was born with profound hearing loss. So I got my cochlear implant. I was implanted in my right ear at age 2.5. So I'm a unilateral cochlear implant user. So just one side, the other ear is deaf. So that was late 1997. So that means that's more than 20 years ago. So I don't exactly remember how I felt at that time. But I do recall that the initial model that I wore was involved a waist bag. It was bulky. Like today, the one that I have is behind the ear. It's small, but the first one I had was it involves a waist bag and a long wire connecting the coil and the speech processor. So that's what it was like.
I just had a question, Peng. So you mentioned that you are only using the CI on one ear and then your left ear is just deaf. Is there a reason that you chose to do this, or maybe your family chose to do this? I'm just a bit curious.
Yeah, so absolutely. So back then, cochlear implant was relatively new. Back in the 1990s, it was relatively new, and it was deemed as risky. It was considered as a risky undertaking. I was one of the first few pediatric cochlear implant users, so it was kind of experimental in a way. So that's why it was one side first. Yeah, so that's why it was just one side. But nowadays, kids, they do get bilateral implantations.
I see. That's very cool. Thank you. I think Kaylin has something to say about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I had a very similar experience. So I also wear cochlear implants, and when I was about I think around 2 as well, I got my first one just because they deemed that they could only do it safely for 1 year. But then I think it wasn't until I was about 8 that I got my second one, because that's when I think they finally decided that I could get both. But I agree, like all the kids now these days are getting 2 straight from birth. So it's very interesting.
It's really cool for me because, I am wearing hearing aids and I don't know anything about cochlear implants. So just getting a sense to know of the process of getting a cochlear implant is just amazing to me. So for our audience to understand and get to sense to know you a bit more, so could you tell us a little bit more about the Cochlear Implants project. How did you get that started?
Right. So maybe a bit of story time. So I was one of the first few kids who got cochlear implant in Malaysia. So that means that growing up, I didn't really have any senior so-called, someone who has gone cochlear implant and grew up with cochlear implant before me that I could refer to, that I could bond with, or I could ask questions, share things like that. So growing up, that was something I lacked. And I felt that it would be nice if I get connected to people. But that's one side. On the other side is that I was also busy with schoolwork and all that throughout my primary school years, secondary school years, and high school years. So I didn't really have time to really stay connected with the cochlear implant community. So it was until university when you suddenly realize that you have a lot of more time for yourself. And it was at university when I started to feel the need, had a thought that, why not I reach out to see like who could I find online, like young adult cochlear implant users. I think you know that there are many, actually, there are quite a few cochlear implant, existing cochlear implant groups, but I noticed that they are mostly catering to parents who are considering cochlear implant for their kids, or retirees, like older people. I feel like there's a gap. There wasn't a lot of group that focus on young people like me in the 20s. So I thought, why not I start reaching out, email people and see like who replies and are willing to share their story, and I can share their stories. I enjoy writing, so I started it in my last semester of university, actually, 2019. So I just Google search cochlear implant users and Instagram hashtag cochlear implant and see who pops up, and try to find out the email address, try to reach them, and so that's how I got started. Yeah. So what it is about, it's really about ultimately to speak, to allow us to speak up on things that hearing people may not understand, but we as a cochlear implant users may understand. Like for example, maybe at the academic setting or workplace setting, when asking for support. Like for me, one of the concerns I had was about asking for support is that on the one hand, I know I need the support, but on the other hand, I don't want to be seen as incompetent. This kind of subtle nuances, I felt like cochlear implant users like myself, especially young adults cochlear implant users, would be able to relate. So I see this platform as a way for people, young adult cochlear implant users like myself, to voice out, to speak out, and actually know that they are not alone, and that we are a bunch of people, we have a similar experience.
Wow. Just everything you just said, I wholly agree, because like I look at different groups and just try to find places to like vibe in, because I have different disabilities other than hearing loss. And so I try to reach out to these people, because when I was a kid, I felt the same way, Peng. I felt like I didn't belong. I wanted to be quote unquote normal, like the whole shebang. And so I totally agree and totally support this project. I'm wondering what the others have to say about that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I can't relate directly to the experience of having cochlear implants as I have hearing aids, but I definitely share your thoughts about, if I ask for support, are they going to think that I'm less capable, or but I still really need these supports to help me achieve my full potential. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree as well, because I know in the past it's been difficult for me to open up and say that I have a hearing loss, because I don't want people to think I'm like a hassle or whatever. So it's very interesting, this project, because it definitely promotes that self awareness in order to get that support.
So how about we move on to this next question? So Peng, throughout your life, you have experienced both Malaysian and or Singaporean culture, and later in university, you've experienced American culture during your studies. How do the experiences of people with cochlear implants differ across cultures, if at all? And I'm glad that we have you here because you can sort of speak personally to that, I believe.
Yeah, that's interesting question, and it's something I'm very interested in. So I graduated with a bachelor's degree in sociology, and culture is definitely something I'm very interested in. And so Yes, I grew up with a Malaysian culture, and I went to Hong Kong for uni for a period of time, and then America, United States. And I feel that the biggest difference would be in the US, the cochlear implant users are much more vocal. They are a lot more active on the ground groups that are speaking up for their needs, trying to get support, even getting the support institutionalized, making it a law. Whereas in Malaysia, it's pretty much scattered. Like I just said, growing up, I wasn't really in touch with any other cochlear implant user. Whereas in the US, it seems to be a lot more established. There are people ready to provide support, and whereas in Malaysia, the people do try to support, but it's more like an individual level, and it's less strong, and the voice is less stronger. So, and actually, one more thing I want to highlight is that my personal experience in Malaysia and in the US, and in the US, I felt a bit more free in a way. I felt like in the US, it seems like individual uniqueness is a norm. It's like, whereas in Malaysia, I feel like I wanted to hide my cochlear implant because I don't want to stand out. And whereas in the US, I felt a bit more free. It was a feeling I had, but I wasn't able to really explain the reason, but there was an experience I had.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting to hear. And that I'm interested to see that there are in fact differences actually. Yeah.
All right, so I will give you the next question. So you talk about self-awareness and with the cochlear implant. So I was just wondering, when did you feel like you accepted yourself as a CI user?
Good question. It would CI was something I struggled with in my teenage years. I think this is very understandable. When you go through a puberty stage, you want to be accepted. You don't want to stand out. You want to fit in, and that I felt that way too. So it wasn't pleasant, and that was in secondary school. Trying to find my position. So it was later on. As of now, I have accepted myself as a CI user, but looking back, I felt like the turning point was in university time. Looking back, I felt like the crucial thing was about self-identity. And this self-identity, hearing loss is part of it, but the other part of it is also about a sense of competence. It's something that mattered to me, like what do I stand for? I don't want to be known just as a person who has a cochlear implant. So apart from cochlear implant, who am I? I do not want the cochlear implant identity to dominate my personality. And it was in university time that I felt like I had found my interest in sociology. And I have a lot of things to talk about it. I have opinions, I have thoughts, I have my own perspective. And that's when I felt like my self-identity is more solid compared to secondary school, whereas I'm just going through school days, just not really having my own opinion, not having my thoughts. And so it was in university time I felt like I've accepted myself as a cochlear implant user.
Yeah, I would agree. University is definitely a time where I think people can like pursue their own passions and sort of decide what they're interested in. So it definitely makes sense. I think that you would sort of see that in university, being like away from home, you get to meet this whole new environment. So speaking about cochlear implants, I was just wondering what the difference is between a cochlear implant and hearing aids, as I've never had hearing aids before. At the very beginning, they did try to give me hearing aids in hopes that it would work, but it didn't end up working, so I went to cochlear implant. But yeah, I was just wondering what the difference is, as I'm not sure myself.
I went through the same process as you. I was they gave me two hearing aids to test first, and when hearing aid didn't work, then I was qualified for cochlear implant. So I have not used hearing aids myself, but based on my understanding is that hearing aids amplifies. It still relies on the auditory nerve that is in the head. But whereas cochlear implant, it bypasses the auditory, the electrical nerve, and so in I think a more clearer analogy would be a person who is blind, whereas a person who is short-sighted. Like where if a person is blind, you give him a strongest magnifying glass or glasses, it won't work. And it's like if a person who is profoundly deaf like myself, you give me hearing aid, it won't work. It's just like how glasses won't work for a blind person. So I thought that probably can help.
Me and Jason, we're the ones with the hearing aids here. So we're like, I'm sure Jason has a better understanding than I do because I really don't know anything. And I just getting that sense of like, oh, the person you wouldn't give somebody who's okay, blind, according to your situation, blind with glasses, like very heavy glasses, prescription, the whole shebang. Like, no, you wouldn't give them that because they are so beyond the path of actually getting anything. That if you were to create something that was super, super strong, I'm pretty sure it would be too heavy for them to wear. That's my understanding. But like getting an understanding with hearing aids, because yeah, like these little things, these hearing aids, they will be amplifying noise, but not. It's like kind of like the same thing where people are always saying, "Oh, you meet somebody who is hard of hearing, just yell like louder." That's not gonna help them, you know. So I think I understand it better, Jason.
Yeah, I actually didn't know too much the details about the auditory nerve and then how cochlear implants they bypass that. So I'm glad I learned something today. So I do have another question for you, Peng. You currently work in marketing in Singapore. How does your experience as a cochlear implant user and also your knowledge of other cochlear implant user situations, how does that inform your work as a marketer? Maybe not specifically, but perhaps in general, and how you view other such groups, and how could this experience inform others, other marketers, other people in business, and so on?
Yeah, I love your question. Um, so I graduated with a bachelor's degree in sociology, and I'm now doing marketing. There's no direct correlation there. Um, but there is the correlation would be I would say while it's not direct, but it certainly has impact. My sociology study, my hearing loss, and my work has an impact because being a hard of hearing person, we are minority. With cochlear implant, it's minority, even much more a minority. So in a way, looking back, I felt like growing up, I was experiencing emotions or even experiencing challenges that maybe hearing people don't experience. And I need to try to make sense of the challenges that I make sense of the feelings I have, make sense of the dynamics, how people are thinking, make sense of like how I should present myself, communicate myself. It's not like I can Google and say, oh, how I should navigate this, because it's such a niche group, hard of hearing and even cochlear implant. So in a way, it's really training me to be observant. I think as hard of hearing person, we tend to be very observant. We look at people's face, like how they are feeling. At least that's what I saw in myself, because I want to make sure they're in good mood before I approach them. I don't want to be like unaware of the environment. So I was observant, and I maybe also because the experience makes me expose me to challenges that people that may be unique. So in a way, it trains me to be analytical, to make sense of the situation, environments, and that is even amplified by my studies in sociology, which gives me the framework, the thought processes to need to process all this. So in today, my work in marketing essentially is about problem solving, making sense of challenges. Marketing, for me, it's really about trying to add value to the customers in a way that customers would feel like that they are getting something out of this, out of the product they buy or the service they get. And so how do we make that? It's an abstract problem. It's a unique problem. And so I see that there's some kind of parallel, although it's not immediate, but it's a parallel of like making sense of the challenges.
Yeah, it sounds like your experience would give you some sort of maybe a unique insight on how groups like niche groups, as you mentioned, like cochlear implant users, who sort of think how they feel, and I suppose that could be very valuable in a marketing career.
Yeah, and actually one more thing I would like to add is about empathy. Because growing up with cochlear implant or as a hearing loss, with individual with hearing loss, we are even more sensitive to the importance of empathy, and we really appreciate it when people are empathetic to us. And empathy becomes something that is it's not something that we take for granted. And so even in my work in marketing, especially, marketing is about dealing with people. It's not just about numbers, and people have feelings. And so being empathetic is something that came naturally to me, and it has helped me in a way that I was able to provide ideas that address certain kind of people's feelings or the thought they may have. So I was sensitive to their feelings, the customers' feelings, their emotions, the state of mood that they are in.
No, thank you. That's a really great example.
Wow, this has been a fantastic time. So, for any final thoughts you would like to share for our audience, Peng?
So final thought, I will be that. So first, I think this podcast is really great, and it really is really a platform to allow us to express ourselves, to voice out, and that's why I started CI project in the first place. Is that so that people have a platform to voice out, and I think this is really important, and this is also something I really appreciate in my time in the US, whereby people, students are really encouraged to express themselves, speak up for themselves. So I really appreciate what you are doing here in this podcast, whereby you are really giving people like me to voice out. So and I think this is really great, and I also like to encourage people just to start a project like what you're doing here. I think it's really beneficial. I think you can testify for that.
Yeah, no problem, Peng. It was a fantastic time, I guess.
Thank you for coming on. It was really interesting to hear from you, learn about your story, learn about the CI project more. Thank
Yeah, same here. It was really interesting, to hear someone else with the cochlear implant share their story as well. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you too.
All right, so let's move on for some CHHA news.
Just like Peng mentioned before, when you have hearing loss, it's easy to feel alone, and the struggle to find a community that can better support you can be difficult at times. Luckily, CHHA has created a mentorship program where individuals aged 18 and above can meet with one of our mentors for advice. One of the unique benefits of this program is that it's very flexible, in that there are no set sessions and thus you can attend as many or as little as you like. Your mentor will be able to help you navigate all aspects of hearing loss, from finding jobs to giving advice on hearing assistive devices and so much more. Not to mention, it is entirely free. So, what are you waiting for? Sign up today at chha.ca/mentor.
To stay on the loop when we drop another Speak Up episode or for other CHHA news, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletters, I Listen and I Listen Plus. You are listening to Speak Up, CHHA's Summer Student Podcast. Stay tuned.